we're gonna be talking about Showercoin or Monero on EOS. So if you haven't heard the news, Dan just decided to go on a Telegram spree talking about this new project he had in mind that's gonna solve everything in the cryptocurrency space. Now, I'm not technical enough to understand everything that he mentioned, but I do have someone here that is very knowledgeable about the cryptocurrency cryptographies behind the projects like Monero, Zcash, and ring signatures and things like that. So please give a big welcome to Asphyxia.
Thank you.
We don't actually have a live. We should have like a clap track in the back. But yeah, so if Asphyxia is working on a very similar project called Atmos, and here you can see the Atmos paper he put out. So when I was reading Dan's article, this thing came like the Atmos token came to my mind very like immediately. Can you just quickly describe what you're trying to do with the Nouvsphere project and the Atmos token?
Yeah, so I'll talk specifically about the part of the project that sort of overlaps and has similarities to what Dan's talking about. So one of the things that we're working on is we want to create sort of like a side chain or side state on EOS, and essentially what this will allow you to do is it'll allow you to move certain tokens as well as EOS itself from the main chain over to the side state by sending it to an EOS contract, and then while it's within the side state, it will inherit certain properties of the side state. Specifically, what we're working on is a side state that uses the ring signature scheme as well as confidential transactions, as we feel this has been a well-tested scheme in Monero, and it's already proved itself and has really become the standard in terms of cryptocurrencies and privacy.
Okay, cool, cool. So that's the privacy part, but like, how does this affect the scalability? Because in the launch of the Telegram messages, Dan also mentioned about it being able to scale to 10 million transactions per second. How would that work?
Okay, so in terms of Atmos, specifically what we're working on, our current design mirrors the transaction per second of the EOS mainnet itself, so it doesn't actually augment it. But
Mm-hmm.
if we want to take a look at how Dan's scheme or other ways that could possibly improve the transactions per second on the EOS mainnet, one place I think we can look is the recent article that was put out by the Ethereum research. And so what they talked about was they talked about using a scheme that was done through snarks, and what this scheme allowed Ethereum to do, or will allow Ethereum to do, was go from 15 transactions per second to 500 transactions per second. So that's about a 33x transaction increase in terms of throughput. Now, we
Mm-hmm.
already know that the EOS mainnet has a significantly higher throughput than Ethereum does, as is. EOS's mainnet has about 4,000 transactions per second. So just applying this exact same scheme that the Ethereum research was talking about on EOS will likely give almost the capacity of possibly a million transactions per
Mm-hmm.
second or even over that. And we do know that there are unfinished parts of EOS that are already planned and being worked on to enhance the software and the speed, such as the parallelized validation. And so all of this stuff compounded together could possibly lead to something around the estimate of what Dan threw out there, 10 million transactions per second.
So he wasn't just pulling that number out of his bottom while he was showering. So that's actually
I think it's a
feasible.
reasonable speculative guess, but really we have to see more research and a little bit more done on it before I think we can really draw any conclusions. I think at this point everything is speculative at best.
Okay, okay. So do you think this token would be built on top of the EOS mainnet, or would it be something like Atmos is trying to do, which is going to be a side state thing?
Um, I'm not entirely sure. I think it would have to exist separately
Mm,
from the EOS mainnet. So very likely what we could see it exist as some either type of a side chain, like sort of like what the other project Werbly is doing, or we could
Mm-hmm.
see a similar design, sort of like the side state that we're working on.
Yeah, so go into a bit about the side states because just for the viewers, so Asphyxia's project is not exactly a side chain. It's something he coined the side states. Asphyxia, do you want to just clarify on that term a little bit?
Yeah, so the difference between a sidechain and a side state is really simply put, in a sidechain, it's expected that that blocks are being produced on the sidechain, and these blocks are bundling transactions, just as like blocks are produced on any blockchain, and then some sort of commitment is written about the sidechain to the main chain. Now, in the case of a side state, all the transactions that are occurring are still actually being written to the main chain, and there are no blocks being produced on a side chain. So the reason, though, this is a side state is because what the EOS mainnet or whatever blockchain you're using for a side state, for that matter, is seeing is it's really just seeing some dummy data. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
really know what to do with the data. It's just data that exists on the blockchain, but
Mm-hmm.
running
Mm-hmm.
some additional specialized software. That software, by examining that blockchain, which is the EOS mainnet in this case, can derive its own state of consensus
Mm-hmm.
by the EOS mainnet providing transaction sequencing. So this is why I consider it to be a side state, because the EOS blockchain itself really doesn't know what the state is, and
Mm-hmm.
so the state sort of exists separately from the EOS chain.
Okay, very cool. And is that the basis on which the form is currently built?
Yeah, so actually,
Oh.
the way upvoting works on the forum, since upvoting isn't actually tracked in RAM, like how many upvotes a post has, it's actually tracked essentially in its own side state.
Okay, okay. So I guess the concern would be that, like who gets to keep this database. But I guess like anyone who is monitoring the main network because the transaction is being written to the main network could derive this side state.
That's correct. So one use case for a blockchain is it provides a decentralized mechanism for transaction sequencing, which transaction happened first, and this is
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
basis for solving the double spend problem. So
Okay,
in this
okay.
case, by using the EOS blockchain, it provides transaction sequencing, and from that we can derive the consensus of the side state. So you should be able to arrive at the same conclusion as anyone else running this specialized software as to who owns what and how much funds have been spent and where these funds are and that sort of thing.
What happened when there's like a disagreement then? Like between the I mean, sure, you could derive the state, but like which one should we listen to? Should we just keep our own we all should just keep our own side state to make sure that everything is correct when they derived it, or how would it work?
So just like how it works in terms of Bitcoin, you
Mm-hmm.
could either run your own node,
Mm-hmm.
which is always recommended, or
Right.
you could always additionally create some sort of an SPV layer on top of this. So an layer being something like a light client that talks to the full nodes and
Mm-hmm.
sort of just doesn't need to actually process all of the side state information. And one of the ways that SPV validates data integrity is it'll talk to multiple sources and
Mm-hmm.
sort of see if they're all saying the same thing. Now that's not the only way it does it, but that's one of the ways you can go about doing it. And in the case of the EOS blockchain, I mean, we sort of already do that by talking to multiple block producers
Mm-hmm.
to,
Mm-hmm.
verify data integrity.
Okay, very cool, very cool. Let me see what else we got here. So simple state validation. So I'm just looking through the article put out here on the forum, which is also Medium. I'll leave a link down below if you want to check it out. Um, yeah, I mean, what other things that stood out to you as Dan made these wild claims? Like to me, it just seemed like almost like an episode of not an episode, but like watching Elon Musk, on Joe Rogan, where he just talk about these things. We're gonna dig tunnels beneath LA, and we're gonna create hyperloops. But like the difference is that Elon Musk actually like he goes and makes these projects come to fruition. Do you think like what Dan said is gonna come to fruition? Because we're still waiting for the wallets, we're still waiting for the DEX, we're still waiting for Steemit, we're still waiting for a lot of things to come. Like, what's your first impression on that?
Um, So I guess first I want to respond to the Elon Musk thing.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, so I feel like Elon Musk has heavily overpromised in terms of what he describes as the Hyperloop,
Mm-hmm.
and because a lot of the people are getting their information from the media and they don't actually have the background necessary in physics,
Mm-hmm.
they're
Mm-hmm.
not actually able to pick apart a lot of what he's saying. And I
Right.
can actually link you to another scientist actually on YouTube who has actually done a reasonably good job debunking a lot of the things he said about the Hyperloop and
Okay.
why the design he talks about is not exactly possible, even though we're continuing to act as if it is. But now, in regards to what you said about Dan, yeah, so I actually think this is very sort of negative for Dan at this point. I think it's really good that he's trying to continue to innovate and come up with really cool and creative ideas, but I think at the same point in time, it might be better for him almost at this point in time to keep a lot of these ideas internal within the Block One development team.
Mm-hmm.
And the
Mm-hmm.
reason for that is because there is going to be somewhat of backlash from the community, in the same sense of what you just said, where the Block One has promised so many things already, right? They've promised the hardware enclave wallet for having a secure hardware wallet. They've promised free accounts on EOS through their mobile wallet. They've promised Steam at 2.0. They've
Mm-hmm.
promised
Mm-hmm.
BitShares 3.0, and we're yet to really see any of these things come to fruition. So I can understand that a lot of the community might feel at this point what they're being sold is essentially hot air. Now,
Yeah.
I don't think that Dan is selling them hot air, but I think Dan should and Block One needs to start delivering on some of these promises before they continue to talk about other big ideas that they're working on.
Agree. Agree. And like that seems to be like the. I'm not sure that's the majority, but like I've been hearing a lot of people saying the same thing. Like we're getting a little bit frustrated of all the things they're promising us, but haven't actually show anything for that doesn't have anything for show just yet. So yeah. Okay, cool. I think we're gonna have to do a follow up episode once Dan releases more information, or maybe this will just die off after a week or two. Like that seems to be like a lot of the ideas. They get a lot of hype from Dan, and then they kind of just go into the back burner for like months and months and months. But Atmos is a live project right now. They are going to continue work on this idea of privacy tokens and the size states. That is gonna bring some improvement into the ecosystem. Do you have anything else you want to say about your project, Asphyxia?
Maybe not necessarily about my project, but in general about the EOS space.
Okay.
Um, so one thing that I like though is that even though Dan and Block One are continuing to toss these ideas out there, one thing that I do like is while they might not be the fastest at producing tangible results in this regard, they do help to highlight other projects that have similar grounds in terms of what they're trying to achieve. And just to give a different example other than what we're doing and this privacy scheme that Dan's been talking about, I mean, if we look at, for example, the Rex and
Mm-hmm.
Chintai,
Mm-hmm.
it helped to put a lot of focus on their project. So I
Mm-hmm.
think even though they might be slow in terms of developing it, they do give a lot of motivation to a lot of other projects that might be developing similar things, because after all, competition is always a good thing. Competition leads to innovation.
Wait, but aren't you also afraid that, let's say, he does actually actualize on this project, and like that's one of the concerns that a lot of people have about Shintai is like when Rex does come out, wouldn't that just render their project there'd be no need for it.
Well, in the case of Chintai, I can't really speak too much about it. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I think they would have to try to pivot their model somewhat.
Mm-hmm.
In the case of the project that I'm working on, Novusphere's entire goal isn't only fixated on this privacy scheme and bringing it to EOS. I think it's one of the things that EOS really needs, and I would love to
Mm-hmm.
see
Mm-hmm.
it on EOS. And it's part of the reason that we are developing it for EOS.
Mm-hmm.
But if somebody else really beats us to that punch and it works and it works well and it works as intended, I think that's great for the community overall, and I don't see that as a negative.
Wow. Okay, that's great. Okay, so on that note, we're gonna finish this very special session. I think it was a very interesting conversation, and I'd love to have you back on talking about other things that are related to this project or in related to EOS as a whole.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. It was a nice chat.
Okay, thank you very much. See you next time.